Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Money with Alpha. And today I have a very special guest. I am joined by the lovely Emma Gilmour from Hope is Rising Coaching. And she's quite an extraordinary person. I met her through another mastermind group that we're in. And she does something really, really special, which is helping women through alcohol and their relationship with alcohol. And she's a registered counselor and psychotherapist. She's got so many things on her list of what she's accomplished and what she does and where she's been featured. And there's a lot to the journey, and I really wanted to explore that with Emma today. And while there is a financial aspect to the alcohol, it's also then the human aspect too, and how it impacts our lives and our relationships, which creates potentially additional tension, which just flows on into every other aspect of our life. So welcome, Emma. And
Thank you, Alpha.
and please share a little bit more, because I've barely touched on your journey and how, and I'd love to hear it in your words as well, how you've come from where you were and where you are now, and what also led you to help other women through the journey too, because some people just work on themselves and just leave it there, but you've taken it another step further to expand your impact, which is beautiful. So please share your journey.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. I very much appreciate it. Yes, my name's Emma, and I came to be became an alcohol coach and psychotherapist in a bit of a funny way. It wasn't my original career. I started off in corporate marketing. I'm from England originally, and I worked for Warner Brothers in Soho from like 23. I think pretty much straight out of uni. I did a few temp jobs, and then I got a job at Warner Brothers, and I was like, I've made it. Life is fine. And I was only like a customer service person. I sort of worked my way up. I did all sorts of different things in there, and eventually ended up working in marketing and customer marketing. And I was lucky enough to, be part of that whole scene in the 90s, and just really enjoying Soho, really enjoying the bar culture, that sort of media culture, very much drinking and partying, but also working really hard as well. And I grew up with parents who drank to what I thought was a kind of very normal amount of alcohol. Probably now it might not have been considered that, but I was brought up in that way that many of us were at that time, where parents often thought that it was a really good thing to do to introduce their kids to alcohol young. It was kind of like, I don't know, a bit classy, a bit like sort of, we've got a European approach to alcohol, people would say. As if that was like a really good thing. It's like the posh end of the street of alcohol.
Oh, goodness. Yes.
But basically what it was is like, we'd have a bit of wine with our dinner, and really from sort of 11 onwards. And as we got into sort of our teens, we'd drink beer, and we'd kind of socialize in that way with our parents as much as with anything else.
Yeah.
And it was very much part of my upbringing. Never thought anything untowards about it at all. And then I moved to Australia in 2011, I think it was.
Mhm.
And I really struggled when I moved over here. We really struggled to get a job. I had two very young kids. I had a 10-year-old, a 10-month-old, and a 2.5-year-old. And I sort of came over, was trying to kind of acclimatize them, find somewhere to live and find work. And the only work I could find that was what I wanted to do was contract work. And so I kept doing all these contracts. And what I found with that was it was like you were constantly on trial.
Yeah.
I found it quite stressful. So I ended up along with alcohol, another one of my coping mechanisms is work. So I have a tendency to, like so many of us,
Yeah.
work overly hard. And I think I put my heart and soul into really trying to get a permanent role here in Australia, trying to be the best in a very, very competitive market. And so I was working for companies like Disney and Mars. And then I had a interaction with a boss in a company, my final employer, and I wasn't able to deal with it very well.
Mhm.
And I wasn't able to deal with it very well, I think, because reflecting back on it now, I had been pushing myself so hard. I had been using alcohol to sort of numb and control. I wasn't what you would call like a drop I wasn't probably somebody that you'd signal out as being somebody who looked like they were drinking too much or
Yeah.
seemed like they were drinking any more than anybody else. But I know that I'd started to notice that I was drinking more than I wanted.
Yeah.
Like I'd set myself, I was going to drink 2 glasses of wine. I'd end up finishing the bottle. And then I'd make myself bad because of that. I'd be like,
Mm.
oh, what's wrong with me? Why can't I drink like normal people? Which is something I hear people say a lot. Why can't I drink
Yeah.
like, why can't I just have 2 glasses of wine? And
Yeah.
we berate ourselves. And so I started, I was using alcohol, but there was also stress, there was adrenaline, there's a whole sort of cluster of components that led to me being actually far more brittle than I appeared on the outside. And I think to the outside world, I appeared like I had it made. I had a great job in a really great company. My
Mm.
kids were doing fine. Everything seemed very normal, very normal. I was running 10Ks like 3 times a week. I looked and, as I said, to everybody outside, I looked fine. But on the inside, I wasn't fine. I wasn't fine. And it didn't take that much for me
Mm.
to have an interaction with a person who potentially didn't like me or whatever, had taken against me, somebody new who came into a role more
Yeah.
senior than me. And I just didn't cope with their way of dealing with me at all well,
Yeah.
to the point where I ended up stopping my job. I left. I was really devastated because my job had been my identity more than anything
Mm.
else in the world, even
Yeah.
more so than drinking. Um, but it had been my identity, and I didn't feel that having had that experience, I wanted to go back into what I was doing for my job.
Yeah.
So I took a bit of time. At this point, I was rebuilding myself up from sort of a breakdown,
Yeah.
but as part of that, I started drinking more because
Mm.
I was feeling really low about myself. And I remember there was a few things that happened in that particular year, but it was a very stressful year, and it was a I don't know who I am kind of year. I don't know what I'm going to be. And I was in free fall, it felt like.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember there was a situation where we were having a party at home, and I went to put my eldest kid to bed,
Mm.
and he said to me, Mum, can you not bring, I think he was 11 at the time. He said, Mum, can you not bring wine into the bedroom when you're putting us to bed? Because it makes me feel anxious.
Mm.
And it didn't stop me. Like I carried on, I had the party, and then the next day it sort of started eating away at me. And there
Yeah.
was a couple of other things that happened that I just didn't like, just little alarm bells going off in my brain just to say something's not right here.
Mm.
And this was actually quite out of character for me, but I think it was probably one of my biggest signals was that I wasn't enjoying being with people.
Mhm.
And I found I was really ashamed of what had happened at my workplace. I felt really ashamed not
Mm.
to be this person that I thought I was. And I think that sort of again added to me drinking more than I wanted to. But I remember we were going away for a camping trip, and I found it quite stressful. I didn't really want to go. And it was 10 o'clock in the morning, and everything was really busy in the house. And I went and got myself a bit of gin. I poured it into a glass, and I had a gulp. And I was like, and this was it. I'm like, I would have had like a gin and tonic in the morning or something with like my grandparents or all that kind of thing. But this was different. I was pouring myself a
Yeah.
straight gin in order to get through something.
Yeah.
And that was when I thought, you know what, and I started doing this whole kind of like dry July, sober October,
Yeah.
hating every second of it. And then during this process, I started to retrain as a counselor and psychotherapist because I was really interested in psychology. And I'd done a bit of psychology in my master's when I was at uni.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is where I want to go. And then I found this program and I did 30 days alcohol free. I had
Mhm.
decided I wanted to take a year off alcohol and see what it would be like to have all the different experiences of life
Yeah.
without alcohol and see if I could manage that, see if that was okay for me.
Yeah.
And I did this 30-day program. Within 2 weeks, I stopped. I was like, I was so extraordinarily like knocked away by the fact that I stopped wanting to drink. Like I
Yeah.
literally was like, I have no desire
Yeah.
to drink.
Mm.
And it blew my mind. And I was like, I cannot believe that me, who was like, what would like a pretty good boozer, had literally gone, I don't want it. I've got
Yeah.
no interest in it. It's lost its appeal to me.
Yeah.
I could take it or leave it, and I'm going to choose to leave it.
Yeah.
And that to me was the holy grail, because the idea of sitting and not drinking, but wishing I was, seemed like a really like well, that wasn't the life I wanted to live.
Mm.
I was either going to be a drinker, go all in, or I wanted to not drink, but not want to drink either. I didn't want to be sat there on the sidelines wishing I could, like, someone looking through
Yeah.
the window.
Yeah. Denial.
Please, can I come in?
Yeah.
Um, and I found that that wasn't the situation. So I had this, what they call spontaneous sobriety, but in reality, it had taken quite a few years to get
To get
to
there.
this
Yeah.
spontaneous place.
Yes. The
And
overnight success.
that's exactly. And so it was that led me to think, well, I'm training in counselor as a counselor and psychotherapist anyway. Why don't I train in this methodology as well and add this to what I do, so that my specialism then becomes working with women in
Yeah.
midlife, because I'm in midlife, perimenopausal
Yeah.
woman who's 50, and have the two work together, so I can then share my just overwhelming excitement
Mm.
about this lifestyle
Yeah.
when you don't wish it was something else.
Yeah.
um, and help other people to have the same experience, because there's so many people who stop drinking and just spend their whole time wishing they were drinking, and that is really tough.
Yeah, that it's that kind of like, oh, I want the chocolate, but I won't have the chocolate.
Yes,
And you're in a constant state of denial and your body feels it.
it's
And
exhausting.
you're ashamed
Yes,
if you overstep. And yeah. And it's a little bit like with even with money and spending, people are like, oh no, I'll either be a spender or a saver. And it's
yes,
one or the other. I was like, well, we're not really that linear as human beings. We
yeah,
can, I mean, when it comes to alcohol, it's a little bit different, but and spend well, I mean, even spending can become addictive as well.
yes,
But there's a real identity piece that goes with it that underpins all that, which is what we were talking about before we hit record. And for you, how do you find for yourself and then with your clients? Because I see this as well. People identify themselves as a certain way with money,
yeah.
and it's stories and beliefs and all of that underpin all of it. How does that come up in your world, and the belief and the identity that goes with all of that you found your journey, and then also working with your clients?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's just been the most extraordinary experience, because I was saying to Alpha before we came on that I actually changed my Myers-Briggs, which is one of those personality
Yeah.
tests that they do in corporate, in industry a lot,
Mm.
to kind of define what type of person you are. And
Yeah.
it's supposed to be like infallible. And for years and years and years, I did Myers-Briggs, and I
Yeah.
would get the same whatever it's called, like grade, I don't know what you'd call
Yeah.
it.
Same profile.
It was like ENTJ. It was like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
perfect person to be working in corporate as a
Yeah.
leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yet when I stopped drinking, I came back and I was like an IN, and I cut F E or so.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like
Quite opposite.
quite opposite. So I had spent my whole adult life thinking I was an extrovert who loved parties, who loved other people, who just wanted to be out there doing and pushing and striving and grinding. And turns out that's actually not my personality at all. It's like that's a defense mechanism, a safety that I created for myself in order to keep myself safe in the world that doesn't value
Yeah.
introverts and quiet people and people who prefer one-on-one conversations to large group conversations, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. And also, I remember being a little kid now, and since I've stopped drinking, there's this whole sort of like, you start to go through, or you start peeling back
Yeah.
all the onion.
Analyze your history.
And I'm like, people used to come around to my house to play, and I used to, you know, be hidden in my bedroom reading my book, and my mum would be like, "Come on, Emma, we've invited these people." My poor sister used to have to play with them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I can see that at some point over I can see all the different times where I made that decision. Oh, this isn't okay. How I am is not okay. And that's what I find with most humans who drink, who wish
Mm,
they didn't. There's things that are in there that are somebody somewhere told you at some point that you weren't okay, or you
mm,
made that decision based on your experience of the world. So you made like two and two equals five. I'm the bad guy.
yeah,
I need to change. Not that, because I think as small people, from everything I've learned in psychology, it's like for small people, we can't look at the world and go, the world is bad, or our caretakers weren't as attentive as they could be, or all of this other stuff. We
yeah,
have, in order for it to be acceptable, palatable for us, it's almost like we have to make ourselves responsible for it, and then we spend the rest of our lives trying to fix ourselves.
yeah. The stories we tell ourselves,
And
and we'll
this,
either go one way or the other. Like I said, my family, I grew up around a lot of drinkers and
yes,
heavy drinkers,
yes,
and I went the total other way. I was like not touching the stuff because I see how you guys are changing, and I remember as a child watching this and just going, "Oh, I don't like this at all." And if that's what alcohol does to people, I'm not going to touch it. Whereas I have cousins who went down the other path,
yeah,
who grew up with the same kind of environment and they became drinkers. So it's really interesting how we can sort of choose our part. Well, choose some to some level, to a great degree, it's unconscious, but as
that's
children, we choose the path that we want, and then the stories that we need to tell ourselves to justify the path we're on.
That's exactly it. And I think, so often we hear in with the humans that I work with, generally, most people are just regular Joes like you or I. There's nothing unusual about the people who have decided that alcohol isn't working for them anymore. But often there's a very, very strong belief. There might be something like, I will be alone. There might be
Mhm.
something like, I'm not good enough. There might be something, there's a lot of beliefs about ourselves which keep us doing things that might be harmful
Yeah.
because unconsciously we're afraid that if we don't, we won't be part of the gang, or someone will judge us as having a problem. And therefore, if we're just judged as having a problem, then we'll be excluded, or then we won't be the same, or then we won't be able to drink like normal people, which is in and of itself is a
Or
fallacy.
we're better than everyone else and we're judging others for drinking because secretly they're judging themselves and they think that person's judging them. It's yeah, and there's so much cultural subtext to all of this, which we spoke
That's
about too. And I remember I started out in accounting when I finished uni, and they drink.
yes.
Accountants drink.
Yeah.
And I didn't. So I missed out on all, like on Monday morning, they're all telling their stories about what happened on Friday night. And one of the guys slept under the table at work and all of this. And they're just going, I
Yeah.
got up early in the morning. I went for a jog on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah.
It never interested me, but there was an element of exclusion that went with that.
Absolutely. And I
So,
think while you're in it as well, like I remember I totally get why people, and I often find that people sort of make a bit of a wide berth around me sometimes, especially in sort of like career kind of things, or, things where networking events, it's like, oh no, she's not for us because she's a non-drinker. And it's like, it's quite interesting how you can kind of watch it happen. But I myself would have probably been exactly the same because
mhm.
I had this belief
Yeah.
that I was a fun person and fun people drink.
Mm,
It's absolute nonsense. I was
yeah.
very rarely fun when I was, slurring my words, or, and the things I used to might have been quite sexy and cool when I was in my 20s, certainly when I entered my, 45, and I was still sort of like trying to be the life and soul of the party, dancing on the tables. And, when I'll see photos or videos, I'm like, oh my goodness. That's no longer the sort of image that I necessarily the picture I have in my head of how this looks isn't how it looks.
For other, yeah, yes, it's and also because as we age, you look in the mirror and you're like, oh wow, who's this person with all these extra
Yeah, yeah.
wrinkles and some gray? Like yeah, it's an interesting kind of concept that our identity changes as we get older as well. I mean, even becoming parents changes our identity substantially because you're like, well, who am I now?
That's it.
I'm not just me. I'm a mum. I'm a wife. So like, and you kind of have these reflections, like, how did this happen? How did I
I
even
know.
just had a friend the other day. He's like, how did I become the mum with the minivan?
Yeah.
She's like, oh my goodness. It's so, yeah, so that identity, the beliefs, the stories, society, all of this, and challenging that is really important. And being accepting of ourselves and one another, I think is a key to all of this.
And I think it's really interesting what you're saying as well, because like one of the things that I find with a lot of my clients are sort of in their 40s, in their
Mm,
50s, people, perimenopausal humans, and they often are like, suddenly the estrogen starts to um, reduce, and
yeah,
suddenly the reality of how we're managing our lives kind of becomes very, very clear. And often we start drinking more, or alcohol has a worse effect on us. It's suddenly
mm,
like where we used to be able to drink a few glasses of wine and feel fine, that's not the case anymore. And so, oh,
yeah,
suddenly we're getting really drunk. We're like, I've only had a glass of wine. What's going on? And it's the hormones. It's
yeah,
insane. And
yeah,
also that whole, like you say, you wake up and it's like, oh my goodness, I am 45, 46, and suddenly I'm here
yeah,
and I'm kind of not this. Is this what I signed up to? And there's
yeah.
this whole kind of like,
Identity crisis.
whoa,
Yeah,
what happened? And
yeah.
estrogen
How did all
happened.
this time pass so quickly?
Yeah, and often kids as well. A lot of people find, especially people who are a bit more sensitive, which I am. I'm neurodivergent. The people who've got a bit more sensitive experience the world in quite intense way. You
Yeah.
have children, and there's all this noise, and you can't
Mm,
get any peace, and
yeah.
nobody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and your nervous system's like, oh, I'm really
Yeah.
stressed out, and that's the reason a lot of women drink as well. It's like,
Yes.
how do I manage all of this external stimulus when I'm already overstimulated, but I can't take myself away. Let them just get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're still responsible for your children I mean, as they get older in different ways, but
That's it.
and they also, you are still the role model as
Yeah,
well. Like I remember when my mother was drinking when I was younger, and I was just, there was a respect and a love there, but when she was drinking, that, that interrupted that respect
yes.
and
And
it created tension.
100%. I love that you say it, and thank you for sharing that, Alpha. It's such an important thing, that whole connection
Mm,
piece, because we think a lot of us drinkers think alcohol helps us to connect,
yeah.
but it actually the opposite's true. And that's like when my son said to me, when you're bringing, because suddenly you're not their safe person.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if their safe person's not their safe person, when who the hell is
Yeah.
there?
Yes.
And
That's it.
that was a really big wake up call to me, because you're right. It's like, as a sober person now, who I've been not drinking since 2020, when when people have had a few drinks, I'm, all good, brilliant. People do what they want to do. It doesn't bother me at all. And
Yeah.
I have no, issue with anybody doing whatever they want to do. But you can see people's eyes kind of glaze over once they've had a couple of drinks and they start
Yeah.
repeating themselves. And the
Yeah.
connections, it really has gone. It's
Yes.
not there.
Yeah.
It's the opposite.
Yes. Yeah. You disconnect and it's, I don't know, the al not even the alcohol, but the something's changed
Yeah,
and you're not real anymore.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like your spirit's gone a little bit.
Yeah. It is a
But
bit.
that was a weird thing to say. I think that's going back to my upbringing, but it's like there's
Yeah.
something
No,
not quite the same.
I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
It's different. Like you can have really beautiful conversations with people when you're in your own self.
yeah,
And then the alcohol, people think it, relaxes them. I was like, oh, well, but it disconnects them.
yeah,
And that is perceived as relaxation.
yeah,
But it's actually not. It's a
exactly.
numbing kind of thing, which, yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting thing in the identity, the stories, and then how our relationships change as a result too, with our partners, our friends, our children, without that sort of, I guess we call it, because I mean, alcohol is called a social lubricant. I
I
was like,
know.
well, why?
I know. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I speak to a lot of my clients of socially awkward, so socially anxious.
Yeah.
Um, and even the most gregarious people can
Yeah.
feel quite anxious about moving because often we're not actually like I say, often most of the people that I work with are actually introverts but who've lived their whole life thinking they're an extrovert like me.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's the idea that they're not is like, wow.
Yeah.
And everyone goes through a bit of like, no, 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 no. But I want that me back again because they were so much fun. And it's like, no, but
Mm.
what about the you who's the real you? Are you
Yeah.
saying that real you's not fun? Because that real
Yeah.
you would really love to know that she was okay too, you know?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
once you start having those kind of conversations with people, that can feel a little bit more authentic and a bit more like once you start talking about the person we left behind when
Yeah.
we chose
Mm.
to drink in order to be this thing that society thinks we ought to be, that
Yeah.
can change the conversation for people quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, I left that little 11-year-old back there. So it might be maybe she deserves some time now. Maybe she gets to have a voice. Maybe she gets
Yeah.
to grow up too.
Yes, have a life, and it's interesting when we think like my daughter's 8, so we're very much in the thick of learning. There's
Yeah.
so much learning going on. There's reading, writing, math. She's doing different. She's learning music, like all these things. It's all learning. And where in this journey do we learn who we are? Where we're told so many things based on our ability to do something at a given point in time, which changes and evolves as we learn and grow, but we never really are given the opportunity or are guided through how do we learn who we are. And because I love all this stuff, my daughter and I have these conversations, and she say to me, Mama, I'm shy. It's like, really? Okay. So I'll challenge her, like, so why do you think you're shy? And were you shy then? No. Were you shy there? Yeah. So what was the, so we sort of analyze it a little bit, but I think it's very much that we kind of go through life, and then the alcohol kind of comes in as this layer on top to suppress things. And
Mm.
then when we start to kind of question, or there's some sort of trigger, perhaps like a child or something else that happens, someone might have an accident or whatever it is. There might be something not very traumatic at all. And then we start to question, and it's delving back into that inner child that we never really got to figure out who they are.
No.
And I think that's the real beauty in the work that you do, is to give people that opportunity.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful, isn't it? Like this idea that I can think back to myself, all the different times where I decided that I wasn't okay. And, I
Mm,
can think back to sort of 5-year-old Emma, 11-year-old Emma, 16-year-old Emma, who had
mm,
no idea what to do with all this amazingness of
yeah,
being a young woman and about to sort of and
yeah,
it was just all too much. It was like we
yeah,
have all this power, no idea what to do with it. So it's
yeah.
almost like the only thing I can do is drink because I don't know. I've got to dampen this all down because it's all, you
Yeah.
know,
There's
uh,
so many choices. I've got no idea. And what choice I make now will dictate the rest of my life.
that's it. That's
I
it.
mean, life is an evolving journey anyway, but we don't necessarily know that. I remember my stepdaughter when she was 17 and finishing school, and she had all this pressure on her to make the perfect
Oh,
choice. And I was like, there is no perfect choice. And right now, there is a choice to make. After that, you'll learn after you make that decision, and then you'll learn a bit more. And now sort of watching her, she's now 22, and seeing that evolve. And there's still sort of self-doubt and all of that, but it's watching that journey going, you don't have to make, there's no such thing as a perfect choice. And I was, I two career changes by the time I was 35. So, like, and then it keeps on evolving. So it really is a journey. Having some clarity over the journey is good, but then we can only do that when we start to figure out who we are and what we want.
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And I was so late to the party. I had absolutely no idea
Yeah.
until I stopped drinking. No idea.
Yeah.
46, no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So we could really go on and on.
Yes.
I'd love to, but what, because there's some really great work that you're doing, and there was one thing in particular that we spoke about earlier. How can people come into your orbit, and what can they focus on to start with to get them really going?
Yes. So one of the things that I've got, which is brilliant, is it's a free awareness worksheet. So wherever you are in your relationship with alcohol, if you're just sort of like sober curious, you're interested, one of the very best things you can do, if nothing else, is to cast some light on your relationship with alcohol. So these worksheets are called my awareness worksheets, and
Mhm.
they are really just about looking at how you drink, why you drink, what it is, like almost like mindful drinking.
Yeah.
And that can just in and of itself can change your relationship with alcohol to one that's a little bit more intentional and a
Yeah.
little bit less self-conscious. So it's not like, oh, how did I end up with this glass of wine here? And how have I finished the bottle? And just also kind of like putting pay to some of those myths around, us it being a weakness of character
Mm.
because we're drinking, which is just not true at all.
Yeah.
Very much a chemistry situation.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. That's a really good place to start. And then if anyone's actually interested in taking some time off, I have got a virtual retreat coming up on the 19th of February.
Hmm.
And you can find that all the information about that. I think Alpha will put it in the show
I'll put it in
notes,
the
but
show notes.
also
Yeah.
on my website, which is hoperisingcoaching.com.
Yeah.
And then I've also got a podcast called Midlife AF, which I'm hoping Alpha's going to come and be a guest on for
I would
my
love to.
humans as well. So those are probably the key places to find me. But I would reach out, send me a DM. I'm always up for chatting with anybody if you've got any questions.
Yeah. Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you very much for doing the work that you're doing. It's extremely valuable because it's not just about alcohol. It's also so much more below all of those layers. You're such a beautiful soul. Anybody who hasn't actually physically met Emma, she's a beautiful, beautiful person, inside and out as well. So it's a very safe place that you'll be in when you're working with her. So thank you once again for being here today.
Thank you, lovely one.